Thank you for joining us on This Week in Turkey. I am Murat, Türsan. Tonight, Erdoğan officially announces his candidacy and calls the opposition leader Kılıçdaroğlu out. Kılıçdaroğlu, meanwhile, makes an attempt at garnering conservative votes. Opposition coalition partner Meral Akşener makes a public apology, and we will have political analyst Berk Esen to make sense of it all. And as the economy takes another hit, the government announces sweeping changes. Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov and Venezuelan President Maduro were in town, and there is much public unrest as local Istanbul municipalities force people out of their homes. But our main story tonight, President Erdoğan officially announces his candidacy and calls main opposition figure Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu out. Erdoğan was in Izmir yesterday to attend a party rally. Izmir, of course, known as a secular coastal city, perhaps the most secular one in Turkey. And it is Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu's district. So Erdoğan went straight to Kılıçdaroğlu's home and called him out. Just to recap, last week, President Erdoğan had called Kılıçdaroğlu out, telling him to announce his candidacy already. Kılıçdaroğlu responded and said, "You announce your candidate and we will announce our candidate. Let's do it on the same day." Well, Kılıçdaroğlu might have painted himself into a corner here because it looks like Erdoğan has called his bluff. The conventional wisdom and speculation in Turkey had always been that Kılıçdaroğlu was vying for the candidate ticket anyway. But of course, there's a problem with that because Kılıçdaroğlu is the lowest polling likely candidate to run against President Erdoğan. According to polls, Kılıçdaroğlu loses the presidential ticket in the first round by 10 points, only eking out a statistical tie in the second. So really, Kılıçdaroğlu is Erdoğan's dream candidate to run against. No wonder he's goading him. So here's Erdoğan calling Kılıçdaroğlu out. Let's go to that video.
Haziran ayının ortasında yapılacak.
You have no place to run, Mr. Kemal. You keep saying, first declare the candidate of People's Alliance. Here, I declare it. The candidate of the People's Alliance is Recep Tayyip Erdoğan. You are yearning for the candidacy in 2023. You are dying to run against me. Stop torturing yourself and your party, Mr. Kemal. Stop bringing shame to constituents and CHP voters. If you have the guts for it, either declare your candidacy or declare your candidate.
And though Kılıçdaroğlu is yet to respond to Erdoğan's challenge, he is making attempts at getting those poll numbers up by trying to appeal to more conservative voters, mainly women of the Veil. In his party's group meeting this Tuesday, Kılıçdaroğlu made an appeal to conservative women by saying the CHP that you knew is not the CHP of today. So Kılıçdaroğlu is trying to form a big tent party, garnering votes from all demographics. But this one may be the hardest to grab yet. See, Turkey has had a tumultuous past with headscarves, not because of the dress itself, but for what it represents, traditionalism. CHP was modern Turkey's first political party, founded by Mustafa Kemal Atatürk. Atatürk instituted sweeping reforms to modernize and secularize the nation. His reforms never officially banned headscarves, but discouraged their use. But in 1980, the military made its third coup in Turkey, and the government officially instituted a headscarf ban in government institutions. That included everything, from government offices to schools, and it only got stricter after 1997's postmodern coup. Now, CHP, as the standard of political secularism in Turkey, has always had a poor image with conservative women. Well, Kılıçdaroğlu says no more and tries to ease their worries with a hadith, a quote from Prophet Muhammad. But will Kılıçdaroğlu actually succeed? Well, Medyascope went to Üsküdar, a conservative district in Istanbul, to see what conservative women think about today's CHP. Let's go to the video.
At his party's weekly group meeting on Tuesday, CHP chair Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu made an attempt once again at gaining conservative women's votes. Reiterating that his party has changed and quoting the Prophet Muhammad, Kılıçdaroğlu said, "Heaven lies below the feet of mothers." But will Kılıçdaroğlu be successful in his attempt to garner conservative votes? Medyascope's Edin Ortanes tried to find out.
Yalan söylüyor. Kılıçdaroğlu neyi doğru söyledi ki onu da doğru söylesin.
Samimi bulmuyor musunuz?
Hayır.
Peki eski CHP nasıldı size göre?
Eski CHP'de geldi SSK'yı batırdı. Fark eden bir şey yok, aynı CHP.
Yani eski CHP değil, evet eski CHP değil. Bunu gençler olarak biz farkındayız. Şu anki gidişatı güzel görüyorum yani. Zaten hani İmamoğlu'ndan da belli hani gidişatları.
Mesajın kendi içinde de çünkü beni şaşırtan ve hatta rahatsız eden noktalar oldu. Ya birincisi eğer kastettiği gibi dönüşen bir gruptan bahsediyorsa o grup cennet anaların ayakları altındadır hadisi ile mobilize olacak bir grup değil. Eğer tam tersi bir grubu sesleniyorsa onlar da açıkçası CHP'nin değiştiğine ne kadar inanıyor ben ondan emin değilim. O yüzden de bir nebze sanırım bir hedef problemi var. Yani kimden bahsettiğini, nasıl bir gruba konuştuğunu ve bu kadınların nasıl kadınlar olduğunu bilmediğini hissediyorum açıkçası.
Yani, çok inandırıcı değil.
Size güven vermiyor mu?
Vermiyor. Yani.
Erdoğan'ın sürtük sözünü kadınlara karşı nasıl değerlendiriyorsunuz?
Öyle bir şey yok. Yani kabul etmiyorum ben onu.
Ha, söylemedi mi?
Hayır.
Ama video var.
Onlar düzmece. Yani neler oldu ülkede?
Kılıçdaroğlu'nun aynı masaya oturduğu kişiler için ben Kılıçdaroğlu'na kırgınım. CHP'yi koruyamadı. CHP'yi önemsemedi. Atatürk'ün kurduğu CHP şu anda CHP değil. Başka bir yöne doğru gitti.
And continuing on with politics, opposition coalition's main partner, IYI Party's chair, Meral Akşener, was in Sakarya province this week and in a surprising turn of events made a heartfelt public apology. Sakarya is known as a conservative and nationalist district. IYI Party does quite well there, after AKP, of course. In 2019, IYI Party grabbed 27% of the vote share to AKP's 65%. So what was the apology about? IYI Party's Ankara MP Halil Oral was in hot water this week when he appeared on a political show and stated that he didn't have a problem with Kılıçdaroğlu because of his religion, but Sunni voters might, and that is a reality that we have to contend with. A little background, Kılıçdaroğlu is an Alawite. Alawites are one of the three major sects of Islam and are a minority in Turkey, constituting about 30 to 35% of the population. Oral contends that this is an issue, whereas President Erdoğan contends that it isn't and he shouldn't worry about it, so let's go with the candidacy. Well, Akşener put all of that aside and apologized both to Kılıçdaroğlu and the Alawites of Turkey. And Oral is currently being referred to the party's disciplinary board. We'll have Berk Esen in just a little bit to make sense of it all, but let's go to Akşener's video now.
Now, I would like to speak to you about something else that saddens me. Our Ankara MP, Halil İbrahim Orhan, had some words on a YouTube channel. I will not try to interpret it. I will not condone if we do what others do. I reject any manipulation on the subject of Alevism and apologize to anyone that is offended, especially Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu as the head of IYI. I will not allow the followers, the lovers of His Holiness Ali to be offended. And I am offended and saddened with them. And I apologize again to Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu and every single one of my brothers and sisters. I entrust you to God.
Joining me now, Medyascope's very own political analyst, Dr. Berk Esen. Doctor, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for inviting me.
Always a pleasure. All right, let's start with yesterday's bombshell. President Erdoğan came into Kılıçdaroğlu's home turf yesterday to announce that he is, in fact, running for 2023 presidential ticket. Izmir, of course, Kılıçdaroğlu's MP district. Now, last week, Kılıçdaroğlu had told Erdoğan, you announce your candidate and we'll announce ours on the same day. No word from the opposition so far on the candidate. Now, do you think Kılıçdaroğlu has painted himself into a corner with the last week's bold comments? Because we've been assuming that Kılıçdaroğlu would be running for the ticket anyway, he just needed time to get his poll numbers up. What's your read of the situation? Has Erdoğan called Kılıçdaroğlu's bluff, and do you expect the opposition to announce a candidate anytime soon?
Yes, I think to a certain extent, Kılıçdaroğlu and several other opposition leaders painted themselves into a corner by making that bluff, and basically Erdoğan, with his announcement yesterday, hold on that bluff. Now, it is known that the 6 opposition parties that have joined as part of this opposition bloc have not necessarily agreed to an opposition candidate, a joint candidate, to run for the presidential election. And I think it's going to take a while before that decision is taken by the opposition parties, because there are several contenders. We know that Kılıçdaroğlu really wants that, wants to run, but there is some opposition coming from other opposition parties, and Kılıçdaroğlu's numbers have not necessarily been high enough. So that's why he needed the time, and have basically taken this position that they were not announcing the candidate because Erdoğan himself has not thrown his hat into the ring. Well, Erdoğan has basically done that. And Erdoğan's announcement caught some by surprise, but in reality, it was to be expected because, Turkey has an authoritarian regime that has increasingly taken on a personalistic direction. So Erdoğan, as an authoritarian leader, does not necessarily have the luxury to let go of power. He cannot necessarily guarantee his regime's survival unless he personally runs for office. So he doesn't necessarily have a successor. So it is really beyond me why opposition politicians have contemplated this scenario in which Erdoğan may not run. So that is definitely a problem for the opposition. I don't think that the opposition parties are in a position to announce their own candidate, at least for a couple of more months. We will probably have a much clearer idea about who the candidate will be, either at the end of the summer or early fall. So in the meantime, probably Erdoğan and Bahçeli and other government spokespeople are going to grill the opposition and personally attack Kılıçdaroğlu for not being courageous enough to get himself onto the ring. And that, I think, is a selling point that the ruling coalition has. In the meantime, I think the opposition can figure out ways of rebuttaling. Rather than announcing the candidate, I think the opposition parties should call on Erdoğan to call for early elections, right? If Erdoğan is so curious to have this kind of a challenge with Kılıçdaroğlu, he should go for early elections in the next few months, which would give an opposition the need to come up with its own candidate. So I think that could be one way that they can put themselves out of the corner. But otherwise, this is going to be a one-to-one battle that I don't think would serve the opposition. Erdoğan knows that, and that's why Erdoğan is really pushing the opposition into a corner where he knows that they don't really have a clear answer.
Well said. And Doctor, let's move on to Kılıçdaroğlu while we're at it. Whether he is or isn't running for president, he sure is taking up the spotlight a lot these days. It looks like Kılıçdaroğlu is trying to make CHP into a big tent party. Back in the day, CHP was known as a somewhat elitist, hard secularist, limited religious freedom party. Now Kılıçdaroğlu makes an appeal to religious female voters this week, saying, the CHP you knew is not the CHP of today. Now, Medyascope went and talked to conservative women on the street, and the feelings are mixed, to say the least. Two-part question. Do you think appealing to conservatives could actually work for Kılıçdaroğlu and CHP? And number two is, by appealing to conservative voters, does Kılıçdaroğlu risk alienating his own base? Your thoughts?
Well, actually, this is a strategy that Kılıçdaroğlu has adopted for some time now. I think since he became the chairman of CHP, this is really the course that he has run. He has really sought to moderate his party's discourse, changed his party's agenda a bit, opened up his party's ranks to conservative people, and really personally appealed to conservative voters over the years. I think the reason why we're seeing this discourse become pronounced in recent months is because I think Kılıçdaroğlu is really trying to become the joint candidate of the opposition, and thinks that if he can get some crucial support from conservative voters, especially voters who are closer to the other right-wing parties that are part of the opposition coalition, he will be able to become the opposition's joint candidate and basically, by extension, win the election. That's why we have witnessed Kılıçdaroğlu come up with personal pleas to conservative voters. This is, of course, a risky strategy to a certain extent. I think one reason why many CHP voters are lukewarm to the prospect of Kılıçdaroğlu's candidacy is this, right? They fear that, after nearly 20 years of Islamist rule, if the leader of the main opposition party continues to appeal to conservative voters while neglecting the very serious problems that secular voters face, middle class, lower middle class voters face, and, as opposed to stick to an economic message, if Kılıçdaroğlu continues to stick to identity politics, this is really going to hurt their interests and hurt the interests of their party. That's why I think Kılıçdaroğlu runs that risk and needs to figure out a way to really balance between these two groups. I think the other downside of the strategy is, I don't know if at this point, after following the strategy for years on end, whether it's necessary for Kılıçdaroğlu to stick to this identity politics discourse. I think amidst this very serious economic crisis, it's much more important for Kılıçdaroğlu to address the economic grievances of the voters, challenge the government's mismanagement of the economy, mismanagement of the refugee question, as well as major gaps in the government's foreign policy. Right? I think Kılıçdaroğlu can come up, can create a big tent party if he can stick to that message as opposed to make these one-time appeals to conservative voters. I think it will be a much more successful strategy for him to appeal to all voters and trying to overcome this Islamist versus secular cleavage by actually identifying more pressing, more important economic problems that face all voters, whether they're conservative or not.
I see. So just stick to policy, and let go of the identity politics. That seems to be pretty common sense, but that does not seem to inflict CHP or any Turkish party whatsoever. But let's move on to this. Now, finally, let's go to Meral Akşener's apology. Meral Akşener was in Sakarya yesterday, where she apologized for the comments of her colleague Halil Oral. To my mind, his comments were rather innocuous, but I am a layman. Now, Oral had said something to the effect of, we have to recognize that Kılıçdaroğlu, being an Alawite, could be an issue with voters. Going to identity politics again. And IYI Party referred him to the disciplinary board, and Akşener made a heartfelt apology on his behalf. Now, what is the significance of this whole ordeal? Your thoughts?
I think Akşener's statement was historic, and it's a welcome change, and it could, in fact, be a turning point for the opposition. Now, of course, we know that, historically speaking, the Alevi-Sunni divide in Anatolian provinces have been a major fault line, going all the way back to the Ottoman period. Alevis have been sidelined from power. They've been prosecuted at different periods. Even though this has partly changed under the Republican rule, particularly in the post-1950 era, right-wing parties have been rather distant to Alevi voters. And I think many Sunni voters continue to hold prejudice against Alevis in general, and obviously Alevi politicians, in this case, Kılıçdaroğlu in particular. So I think this was an issue that was in the minds of many voters as well as politicians, particularly politicians in the right side of the political spectrum. So the Ankara MP from IYI Party have actually raised an issue that was already there, lying dormant, but in the minds of all voters. But the fact that Akşener made an unequivocal apology, both to Alevi voters as well as personally to Kılıçdaroğlu, would be a turning point, because after this point, given the hierarchical nature of the IYI Party, given the fact that the chairwoman of IYI Party has come out in such strong defense of Kılıçdaroğlu, I think it is going to be extremely difficult for any other IYI Party politician, maybe even any other opposition politician, to mention this point again. Right. So I think it was in that sense historic. Now, whether or not that could really persuade some of these Sunni voters who may hold prejudice against Alevi politicians is another discussion. I think this would be an uphill battle, but it is an important battle that the opposition needs to give in order to democratize the country, because if Turkey is going to become a democratic country, we cannot continue to have this fault line between the Sunnis and the Alevis. And basically, Akşener, by coming out in such strong support of Kılıçdaroğlu, have joined in this fight. And I think we're going to see IYI Party make the case that Alevi or not, right? All politicians have the right to run for office. And in fact, if they have a strong agenda, they should win the elections. Now, that is not necessarily a blanket statement of support for Kılıçdaroğlu's presidential aspirations, but I think it would rule out any kind of criticism coming from the opposition against Kılıçdaroğlu's candidacy on the basis of the fact that Kılıçdaroğlu is an Alevi. So in that sense, it is an important development. Now, I think the opposition needs to run home with this point, particularly in order to prevent Erdoğan from exploiting this issue in the coming weeks and months.
Dr. Esen, thank you for making sense of it all, and it's always a pleasure to have you on. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.
And in the economy, things are looking pretty grim, or at least they were until this morning. Now, things are simply uncertain. President Erdoğan threw the market into a frenzy again this week when he announced that the central bank would continue to reduce interest rates. Every time President Erdoğan has done this, it has caused greater and greater crashes in the lira. But President Erdoğan stands fast on his unorthodox economic policies. So, if the central bank will not utilize the one major tool in its arsenal to combat currency devaluation inflation altogether, it has to come up with more novel policies to A, remove the money supply from the market, B, reduce spending and debt, and C, inject some much-needed foreign currency into the capital markets. So, several governmental agencies have announced sweeping policy changes. Banks are capping personal loans at a maximum of 100,000 liras. Government is offering attractive bonds to get people to buy lira and put it into savings, and the Capital Market Board is slashing trading fees. No telling if it will actually work this time around, but those are the main takeaways from this morning's announcements. Here's that story.
The Turkish economy is in hot water again this week as the lira takes another significant hit. This morning, state agencies announced 3 sweeping measures to combat the economic decline. The Banking Regulatory Agency is capping loan amounts, the Treasury is issuing new bonds, and the capital markets are slashing fees. After his cabinet meeting on Monday, President Erdoğan announced that the central bank would continue cutting interest rates, sending the lira into freefall. As the government attempts to combat inflation without hiking interest rates, Banking Regulatory Agency, BDDK, is capping 2-year consumer loans at 50,000 and 1-year loans at 100,000 liras to rein in inflation. As a second measure, the Ministry of Treasury and Finance announced state revenue-indexed bonds. The bond yields will be tiered to revenue gains by state enterprises in an attempt to incentivize lira savings to halt the lira's decline in value by limiting money supply. In addition, the Capital Market Board slashed fees for foreign investments, began the issuance of gold certificates, and is opening a commodities market to compete for much-needed cash injection into the market. Whether these measures will halt the free fall of the lira needs to be seen. Minister of Treasury and Finance Nurettin Nebati stirred up controversy on Monday when he stated, "We chose to grow with inflation. Manufacturers and exporters all are profiting from this model, all except low-income people." The Turkish Statistical Institute announced CPI at 73.5% this month. Numbers so high that the parliament passed a bill capping property rental price hikes at 25% in 8 days, and TSI had to issue a warning to employees to stop calling in sick on the days inflation numbers are released. As inflation rises, OECD revises its projections for Turkey, upping its CPI projections from 21.6% to near 39%. OECD also lowered its unemployment projection for 2022, however, from 12.5% to 11.8%. This morning, the TSI announced the latest unemployment numbers at 11.3%.
And in Turkey on the world stage, Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro was in Ankara this week, paying President Erdoğan a state visit with what appeared to be a great deal of enthusiasm from both sides. The takeaways from the meeting was Erdoğan saying that he intends to expand trade with Venezuela to $3 billion. This, of course, could be construed as making enemies while making friends, because nobody in international relations exists in a vacuum. The United States famously considers Venezuela as an anti-democratic state and doesn't even recognize Maduro as a legitimate president. Now, Turkey's economy continues to crumble, and in this process, Venezuela could serve as a much-needed ally and an asset, but it could come at the expense of Turkey's relations with the U.S. Meanwhile, on the same day Maduro visited Erdoğan, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov was in Ankara meeting his Turkish counterpart Mevlut Çavuşoğlu. Now, besides the humanitarian crisis in Ukraine, there is now a worldwide grain crisis brought on by the war. Çavuşoğlu evidently tried his best to alleviate the situation, but Lavrov denied all responsibility from the Russian side and stated that it, in fact, wasn't Russia, but it was Ukraine that was holding up the grain. Let's go to that story now.
Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro arrived in Turkey this week on an official state visit. Maduro's official Twitter account broadcast the entire event, often going live. President Erdoğan announced during the meeting that the nations were aiming to expand the trade volume to $3 billion. Opportune timing for Turkey's fledgling economy and Venezuela being barred from receiving an invite to the Summit of Americas by the U.S. Political analyst M. Toner commented on the significance of the state visit, saying, "The Biden administration did not invite Venezuela, Cuba, and Nicaragua to the Summit of Americas on the grounds that they are anti-democratic states. Maduro is trying to send a message to the U.S. by visiting Turkey on the same day. You can try to oust me as much as you want, but I will always find partners who will accept me and be willing to do business." Of course, that partner being a NATO member and a U.S. ally is also an important matter. Meanwhile, Foreign Minister Çavuşoğlu hosted his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov on Wednesday in an attempt to solve the ongoing grain crisis. After the meeting, Çavuşoğlu stated a mechanism of a grain corridor between our countries, UN, Russia, and Ukraine seems to us like a feasible plan. Lavrov also spoke about the grain corridor out of Ukraine and denied Russian responsibility. If the Ukrainian side is ready for the process of removing the mines, then we are also ready for this. This is a minor issue. Our side sets no obstacles. We do not prevent the ships from leaving.
In other news, there's massive public upheaval in Istanbul's districts. We've had several crises this week. First one is in Fethiyetepe neighborhood on AKP's turf. Reportedly, the government's urban transformation policy is again taking its toll. Urban transformation has been one of the key words in Turkey's urban population since AKP's rise to power. Entire neighborhoods in major cities are demolished to make way for new residences, shops, infrastructure, and alike. Construction sector was one of the key driving forces during AKP's heyday when Turkey had the world's second fastest growing economy after China, and AKP has been trying to relive its glory days ever since. As the buildings are demolished, of course, the residents have to live somewhere else before taking ownership of their new homes. And usually, either a whole or a portion of the rent is paid for by the developer during this time. But the developer is offering just 1,500 liras for the residences of Fethiyetepe. Practically nothing considering the rental prices these days. So there were a lot of holdouts in Fethiyetepe. But whether they agreed or did not agree, the local government is powering through. The residences of the neighborhood had their power, water, and gas cut off this week, and the police called to the scene to deal with the unrest. Meanwhile, in another AKP district, locals protest the demolition of a park to make way for a bazaar the residents call redundant. CHP's provincial president Canan Kaftancıoğlu was at the scene. Let's go to that video now.
I have a 75-year-old mother. I kept saying, don't cut the water. She has colon cancer. She has a colostomy bag. He said, let's see if you're exempt. He looks and says, we have to cut the water. I kept telling him, my mother has colon cancer. She lives with a bag. What do you want her to do? He says there is nothing to do. They cut the water. They're telling me, let her live with her let her drown in her own
I just gave birth. My husband went to the Social Security office 3 or 4 times, but they didn't give the child a residency, and they even deleted my husband's residency. That's the situation we're in. We have been living here for 12 years. We never made that request. They even deleted our residency from our home. How is this lawful? They have been voting for these people for 20 years. We elected them. Is this why we put them in office? No one is consenting to this. No one. Where am I supposed to go? Apparently, they pay 1,500 liras toward your rent. You can't find a rat hole in Istanbul for less than 5,000 liras. I have 3 kids. Where am I supposed to go?
Hoplayacağız, zıplayacağız, farkı bırakmayacağız. Hoplayacağız, zıplayacağız, farkı bırakmayacağız. Sabahın 5:30'da.
At dawn, 5 in the morning, they come here with bulldozers to destroy the park, but there's still a ban on music at midnight.
Müzik yasağını saat 12 ile sınırlıyor.
Our struggle is for the green spaces. We are fighting for them. We know the demolition date and we know the completion date and we know that they don't have a building permit at all. They are just plundering this place. We demonstrated in front of the municipality and nothing came out of it. We came here and nothing came out of it. Finally, the bulldozers arrived.
Buraya kepçeler geldi.
Ben atlayarak geçtim. Yüklenici firma polis arkadaşlarla bizi dışarı atmaya çalıştılar. Ben elimden geldiğince bütün arkadaşlarımı buraya çağırdım. Biz burayı hep birlikte korumak istiyoruz. Bakın bir sürü ağaçlar var. Şuradaki ağaçlar hepsi üzerinde kirazlar.
Düşmanlığına ve rant kardeşliğine.
With their parting shot, they are being hostile toward the green and friendly to the rent seekers. Approximately a year ago, we visited a park that our district head spoke of, in front of a complex where children are playing, which was opened to construction. But in cooperation with the local residents, we started a process which led to the halt on the construction, and we are still working.
And with that, that's the end of the show, folks. Special thanks to Kathleen, Phelps, Senem, Görür, and Heyse for voiceovers, Mehmet, Tanrıverdi for text. And if you haven't done so already, please consider subscribing and support us on Patreon if you can. And while you're at it, let's hear what you think. Can Kılıçdaroğlu actually stand up against Erdoğan in the 2023 election? Or is it going to be an easy win for Erdoğan? Comment your thoughts below. And with that, that's it for us on This Week in Turkey. I have been Murat, Türsan, and thank you for joining us.
Türkiye'nin sivil, bağımsız, özgür ve çoğulcu bir medya ortamına ihtiyacı var. Medyascope, 20 Ağustos 2015'te bu ihtiyacı karşılamak üzere yola çıktı. Ama yolumuz uzun. Bu yolculukta bize Patreon veya YouTube'un katıl butonu üzerinden katkıda bulunabilirsiniz. Destek verin, sizinle güçlenelim.